Of Galesburg next to me. All right. Hello, everybody. We are live now. This is welcome to the Illinois Green Party series. I'm your host, David Rich. We have two great guests on tonight. We have Black Alliance for Peace organizer Nicholas Richard Thompson. Hello, Nicholas. How are you?
Hey, brother. How you doing?
I'm doing great. So Nick is a repeat frequenter on this show for sure. I think this is your third, or at least third, if not fourth time. And we have his comrade from the CAARP, Kobe Gilroy. Did I pronounce that right?
It's Guillory, like rhymes with Hillary.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. That actually makes more sense now that I'm looking at the spelling. Okay, welcome both to the show. Great to have you. Just to be polite, why don't we let Kobe go first? Tell us about the CAARP and what you represent, what you're doing, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So it's the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. So there's an R at the end, or it's CARPR for short, or CAARPR. It was formed the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression was formed in 1973 out of the fight to free Angela Davis and all political prisoners.
Wow. Yeah.
So, it's been around for quite a while. Because of all the political repression, COINTELPRO, all the FBI raids, which is making a resurgence now. The alliance was put together to fight back against that, to defend political prisoners and to defend the movement of people. Black liberation movements, indigenous liberation movements, workers' movements, all are things that the alliance was designed to protect. But at the same time, because of that repression and because there was sort of an ebb tide, the movement sort of goes in ebbs and flows. Because of this ebb tide that happened between the 70s and the 2000s, for a while, the only chapters of the National Alliance were Chicago and St. Louis. Recently, the Chicago Alliance, actually, the National Alliance was refounded in Chicago in 2019, and since then we've been engaging in struggle around the country. So mainly what the Chicago Alliance is fighting for, we have two major campaigns. One is for community control of the police, essentially saying that people have the right to decide what public safety looks like in their own communities. They have the right to decide, what the police are doing, who's on the police force, whether there is a police force or not. These are things that should be left up to the control of the people. And, right now people have pretty much zero say in what the police are doing in their cities. A second campaign.
Can I ask you a question about that point right there? Do you mind?
Sure.
I've often wondered, the rules and regulations of police behavior on people that who design, who is it that said it's okay for you to take out your billy club and clock me over the head at this given point, given these, who decided that? Do you know? You said that we have almost no, it seems like we have no power. We just have to do whatever they say, right, wrong, or indifferent. And so who decided? Was it the legislators? Is there some sort of secret cabal of freaks that are saying, hey, go ahead and beat up American citizens? I mean, go ahead.
So it's an issue of class, and it's an issue of nationality, of oppression. The system of white supremacy wasn't built by a single person or a single institution. It was kind of constituted over years and years and years of, first of all, of land theft, of the land and resources of this land that we're on, that is now North America, as well as the enslavement of millions of Africans who were brought to the United States to work, under some of the most brutal conditions. These were some of the most exploited people in history, and out of that came this idea. In the plantation system, what they needed in order to control, at the time, there were, I think, 4 million Black people in the South. In order to control all those people, they needed a full-time force to put down any kind of rebellions, and as well as in the north, and yeah, in the north, uh, while industrialization was moving ahead, um, workers became more and more organized, more and more militant. They started striking. Going on strike was actually illegal. It was a capital punishment around the 1800s.
Oh,
So between keeping the workers from organizing and fighting for better pay, and keeping slaves from rebelling, that's where the violence of police came from. And um, we see that violence still today in the prison industrial complex and in the way the police have infiltrated and uh, attacked any kinds of movements for the working class and for oppressed people over the past 100 years.
yeah. Okay, that's very interesting. I did know the two things that you mentioned, that police were, and ironic nowadays because they're a union, that they were huge union strike busters, like violently would do so. And that, especially in the South, but even in the North as well, policing in America started to hunt down runaway slaves and to oppress slave rebellions and stuff like that's. I actually interviewed a cop on my radio show once, and I brought that up to him, and he didn't know that. I'm like, it's not a very noble beginning for you guys. That's and that crap is still going on, just in different form. Um, so that kind of thing. Yeah, he was quite shocked by that. But yeah, okay. So please go ahead with the CARPR and what it's doing about all this stuff.
Yeah, so it's not a very noble beginning, and it's not a very noble current reality either, because out of the movements of between the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement from the 50s to the 70s, um, you know, as well as the multinational working class movements of the 30s and 40s. Those really rattled the white supremacist capitalist ruling class of the United States. So that's why we've seen such a skyrocketing in police budgets pretty much all over the country, and that's why the mass incarceration of the prison industrial complex exists today. Um, because they're deathly afraid of any kind of organized resistance against the conditions and the conditions of exploitation that they're keeping Black people in and other oppressed people in this country. So the Chicago Alliance, our two major campaigns. One is for community control of the police, because again, we believe that people power is the only way that we can ever actually get anything done. Any change that we want to be made uh, has to start from a position of us being empowered and not begging for a politician to do anything. Right?
Right.
Whenever politicians do something, it's because uh, it's as a concession to the demands that people have made. And until we have complete power, they're going to try to. The saying is they give with an eyedropper and they take with the shovel. So any concession that they make, we have to keep fighting and keep moving. Um, so that's community control of the police. We took a step towards that with the Empowering Communities for Public Safety Ordinance, which passed in July of last year. We're still fighting to get it implemented because, just the way that the city works, they're not trying to hold the police accountable at all. So it was a struggle to get it through city council. It's a struggle right now to get it implemented. But before I go into the specifics of ECPS, our other campaign is the Campaign to Free Incarcerated Survivors of Police Torture, or CFIST. So I don't know if your viewers know about John Burge, who was a cop in Chicago. He was actually a Vietnam vet. He learned in Vietnam how to torture people, and he took those lessons into Chicago, tortured people for a few decades. He was actually he had one of the highest rates of clearance of murder cases, because he wasn't actually solving these cases. He was just torturing whoever he could into confessing to things that they didn't do. So of course, John Burge is not the only detective in Chicago who did this, and Chicago is not the only place in the country where this happens. But I think it's the most, Chicago is kind of where the most light has been put on this issue. We have a torture justice center here, as well as a torture memorial. But there are still hundreds of people who have been tortured, torture survivors, as well as people who weren't technically tortured, but who were framed or who had witnesses coerced to give evidence against them or to give false evidence against them. Hundreds of them are still locked up in prison. Some of them after 30, 40 years. And, going through the court system is it takes a very, very long time, and you might not even get results that way because a lot of these judges are just racist. The system is made up not just of police, but of judges, prosecutors, et cetera, politicians. So the goal of the CFIST campaign is, while we're supporting families who have loved ones who are locked up unjustly, I believe everyone is locked up unjustly. Everyone who's locked up is there unjustly. But we have a particular focus on people who survived torture or people who were very blatantly wrongfully convicted, because that's a starting point to tackling the whole system of mass incarceration. So while we support those families with their court cases, we're also petitioning Governor J.B. Pritzker to just sign pardons for all of them. People who were tortured, I think it's safe to assume that they did not do the crime. So we have been putting that pressure on J.B. Pritzker. Some people have gotten freed, whether by clemency petitions like Gerald Reed, who spent 30 years in prison for something he didn't do, and whose mother, Amanda Shackelford, had been fighting for a very, very long time to get him out. He got freed last year in April. And recently, about 9 people in the past 2 months have gotten freed, not just by J.B. Pritzker, but because we've also been putting pressure on the state's attorney, and judges have kind of been feeling that pressure as well. So their decisions have gotten much more in line with what is actually just, in the sense that they're dropping the charges against these people who have been locked up for such a long time.
Yeah, that's mass incarceration. So I just want to let the viewers know a couple things here real quick in light of what Kobe's saying. America, as the land of the free, has more people incarcerated in this country per capita, which makes it proportionate, than any other country in the world. With all of those, about 210 some odd sovereign nations out there, probably 50 plus ish, like totalitarian, authoritarian regimes kind of thing. And they got nothing on us. Number 2, out of, again, about 210 sovereign nations, American police rank sixth, if you can see that, in the world for police killings. And we're talking since 2022, so since 2002, police in this country have killed literally over 20,000 people. It's over 1,000 a year. It's ridiculous. Yeah. It's unbelievable.
I would also interject.
Go ahead, please, Nicholas. Please.
Just something you said. I think that's important to contextualize, right? I think redefining what I don't think the United States should be able to define what authoritarian is. A lot of times, even the way we have realized what authoritarian looks like, to have the audacity to call other places authoritarian, I think is one, like, it's funny. It's actually funny.
Fair
but
enough.
2, the United States is one of the, I think, number 1 violators of human rights. So I think that's another thing that as we work to undo the police state and the prison industrial complex, we have to also connect that to the international question. And I think what Kobe was talking about with John Burge, right? His brother, was part of that process of, the imperialist project of the United States, and came back and used those tactics. So the imperialist project is deeply tied to these domestic occupations of, colonized folks here in the United States. And, I always want to make sure that's contextualized, that, when we make a comparison saying, well, United States is, far more authoritarian, well, United States shouldn't be able to define that. And oftentimes these places that are defined as that have been defined as such by the United States. So we should be, I think, dubious at the very least of that definition of what counts as authoritarian, because if we recognize here that the prisons should not exist and the policing is an aspect of social control and protection of capital, then we should probably be dubious of the same institutions that are then defaming and making claims about other places,
100%.
because we can't trust those sources, right? That's the biggest thing, because they have I think a concerted effort and objective and their permanent war agenda to make other places look like the bad guys so that they can have the pretenses to do what they want, whether it is economic, political, or sometimes militarily, which less. We're seeing a low intensity imperialism these days, where there's proxy wars and other backhand things, not just as many military incursions. But to that point, I want to make sure that's understood. And then just to the police killings too, there was a website that I think was doing an average job, but even they said they couldn't capture the totality. It was called Mapping Police Violence, I believe, and they did a decent job. And I think we're undercounted, to be quite frank, right? I don't think we're 6. I would argue we're much higher. And then even how the United States gathers information of other places, I'm dubious of that. So just to contextualize that, but that's what I want to say.
You're making valid points for sure. Absolutely. I wanted to make a third point and I forgot. All right, anyway.
My apologies. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. It's okay. It's okay. I was telling Nick before the show, Kobe, that I research policing in America literally every day for like 2.5 years now. I don't know how I got so fixated on it. Like I've met a couple of cops that were not very friendly, but I never been arrested. I've never had any problems with it. From a young age, I just couldn't believe the power that they were allowed to have over other people. Like I was saying to Nick earlier, that if I don't want to give you my ID, or if I don't want to tell you my name, you get to like kick the shit out of me. That's somehow okay. That's ridiculous. And I'm a big fan of, I'm a very morally centered person. And, I have a philosophy degree. I studied ethics and all sorts of different camps and theories on ethics and morality and that kind of thing. And this whole notion that a government can actually allocate, special rights to people, like a cop gets to do that to you, but you don't get to do it back, is absolutely logically absurd. There's no such thing in morality as special rights. A right is a moral allowance for behavior. It has nothing to do with government allocation of anything. It's not the one thing the founding fathers got right is that it's innate in everybody. It's not given to you by a government. Okay, that's you're born with reason and free will. That put those two together. That's morality. That the reason will tell you what's right and wrong. Blah 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 blah. So this notion that like some people get to do things to all other people that all other people can't do to them is complete horseshit. There's a right is a right because it's right. Nobody has the right to do or be wrong. There's no like special occasion where you get to do the wrong thing and it's okay just for you, but nobody else in that same situation. That's ridiculous. Anyway, I can go on forever about these morons.
Yeah. Oh no, yeah. Just sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but just to that point, there's a lot of things that seem absurd. When you kind of look at it as on an individual level, the fact that a cop can kill somebody and just get away with it, that's absurd, right? The fact
that's
that
extremely
they can talk about serving and protecting, and then a school shooting happens and then they don't do anything about it, but then harass and brutalize the parents of the kids who are actually trying to help the kids. That's absurd. But then when you think about when you kind of zoom out and look at why, not just the stated intention, but like objectively, historically, why the police exist, it kind of makes a little bit of logical sense as to why, for example, putting somebody on a slave ship, that's absurd, right? Like the idea that you can take somebody's freedom and make them work basically to death, that's absurd. But then when you think about how much just hand over fist money these people were making off of slavery, it starts to make sense. And all those justifications, all the racist ideology that they've invented since then, all the way up until today, where it used to be, these Africans have wild and unruly temperament, and they have to be controlled. And now it's like, these inner cities with their urban culture and their gangs and their you know they have all kinds of modern updated language, but at the base of it, the economics of it are still the same, where they're trying to exploit certain people and super exploit certain people, because almost everybody under the system of capitalism is exploited. If you work for a wage and you don't own anything, nobody else works for you, you can't just live off the work that other people are doing, then you are exploited. But some people are super exploited. People who are oppressed. That's why they have to keep inflicting violence on certain communities to keep them disorganized, to keep them economically disempowered, and politically, economically, socially disempowered and disorganized. And so something that Nick said earlier, the connection between oppression within the United States and oppression that the United States inflicts on other countries, that's also a part of the super exploitation, right? It's the same system of exploitation that affects Black people, indigenous people, immigrants in the United States, that is the reason behind U.S. interventions in other countries. So even beyond what's the moral thing to do or what's the right thing to do, the strategic thing, if you are somebody who is exploited, which again, I'm assuming, unless you have like some millionaires watching your show, I'm assuming everybody who's watching this is exploited. So if you are someone who is exploited, it's in your best interest to fight for the interests of other people who are also exploited and also oppressed. So that's why the Chicago Alliance, in addition to what we're doing locally, we also try to have an international focus. We work pretty closely, with internationalist organizations like the Black Alliance for Peace, like the United States Palestinian Community Network, or Anak Bayan, which focuses on the rights of Filipino people. All of these struggles are connected, so it's kind of like we all have to fight together against a common enemy and towards a common goal. Which is why I just kind of to bring it back to what Carper is doing locally, the fight for ECPS. We got a lot of union support in that fight, partially because a lot of the unions in Chicago either have predominantly Black membership or Black leadership, and the membership, just for example, SEIU Local 73 has a lot of members who have experienced police violence or who have loved ones who've been impacted by police violence. Amanda Shackelford is a retiree from SEIU Local 73, and her son Gerald Reed was in there for 30 years for something he didn't do. Same thing with Regina Russell. She actually just retired from SEIU, and her son Taman Russell has been locked up for the past 20 or so years for something he didn't do. So it's in the best interest of unions, of any working class organization, to fight for what the Black liberation movement is fighting for, to fight for Black power, Black control over our own communities, community control of the police, as well as everything that other oppressed nationalities, organizations are doing. Just kind of to broaden it a little bit, the fight of land defenders, of indigenous land defenders against pipelines that are ripping through their land. That's a fight that everybody who is working and oppressed has to be, at the very least, supportive of, and figure out a way where you can fit in. So yeah, that's just something I wanted to add to the conversation on that.
No, I appreciate that. Nick, you got some?
I think he really covered it all. Highlighting the I think the need and the necessity to link the domestic to the international and never unlink the two. Only thing I'll echo, and it's really that I think oftentimes people take what the United States does as a couple things, right? They'll say things like national security, or we attribute bad policy and their continuous wars as these people are incompetent. This is all very strategic, and they're not always completely successful, but they always win. And that is due to their complete organization. It's not because they have stronger ideas, better values. That is all nonsense that we have to kind of like unlearn. But it's because they have the most amount of violence and they organize that in a very effective way. And they're able to do that domestically to maintain the dominance, like I said, of the colonized communities, to put them into the prison industrial complex, to extract, super profits for people, but then also extract from every type of worker. They do that internationally to get resources from the Congo to Bolivia. They'll do anything they can to ensure they can have either political domination, economic domination, or a geo-strategic military strategy that in the future, they're very strategic in what they do. And it's not a bumbling empire. They're not doing this by mistake. It's not because they don't have the proper information. Even in terms of like the 94 crime bill, which comes up a lot. I talk to people and they see it as people were fearful and they made a mistake. This is deliberate. And as soon as we stop seeing this as flaws and actual features of what they're trying to do, which is genocide, I think we have a better analysis. We come to better conclusions. We can organize better. But if we continue saying, well, they're just making gradual mistakes that kill millions, well, no, these aren't mistakes. This is strategic. It is concerted effort, and it has been since the inception of the United States. It's a and Black Alliance for Peace, we call it the Pan-European Capitalist Colonial Imperialist Patriarchy Project. That's what it is, and that's why we're Pan-African. We realize that the opposite of that needs to deal with that contradiction is that, right? A unified, strong Africa, a socialist explicitly with workers owning that and having that type of power in that society, a decolonial project looking at that from a people-centered human rights type of, a movement. And that is one of the key features, I think, that, in all of our campaigns and that we try to push that this is not by accident. This is not a bumbling empire, that this is very deliberate, and we need to be deliberate about our strategies towards that.
That's very, very well said. Would you mind if we use that as a segue to talk about AFRICOM?
Sure. AFRICOM? Absolutely.
Is that okay? Kobe, you good with that?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Nick, go ahead and start us off, please. This is really insightful stuff.
Sure. And we talked about it before, so I'll leave up more questions if you have questions, but I'll just give the basic foundation for viewers who are not familiar. And every October, we have our campaign to raise awareness around AFRICOM. And AFRICOM is essentially, ostensibly what they claim it to be, is a security project to protect the different interests in Africa. But different Navy admirals have legitimately said verbatim that, well, AFRICOM's main presence is to protect the free-flowing resources in and out of Africa. So for context, obviously, if you ever heard of what the scramble for Africa was, which, predates the contemporary scramble for Africa. But I bring that up because it was a scramble for the different places, right? The borders in Africa were, put in at the Berlin Conference in the 1800s. It wasn't determined by, the African people on the continent. So you have that. It was a scramble for resources, and they partitioned the entire continent between the European, Western European powers. And that's why you had colonization for so long. That's why you had places like from Mozambique to Burkina Faso to the Congo struggling, and still today they struggle on other now neo-colonialism and in different ways. The reason why that took place was because of the Berlin Conference. The new scramble is happening in a different way, and I think it's emerging. And the United States, one of the favorite things to do is to, I think, displace, point fingers, and project. And now they're saying they point at everybody, but places like the United States and the French. You might hear a lot of things about what China's doing, right? The most debt in Africa right now is being held by private interest banks that are from Western places, right? But that's a big talking point, and that's why I bring that up. That's why, for context.
Sure.
Moving to AFRICOM, right? So because there's because the continent is so rich and bountiful in resources, to where this would be the most powerful if it were to be a super state, if it was federated, which, the Pan-African, that's something that I push for, right? Or to be a super state, and it had, the ability to work toward the self-determination, which means the dictating, determining, deciding the policy, the politics, the economics there, it would be the strongest nation, bar none, because of its rich resources. And that is known. So again, it is deliberate. They're not just Africa because they're bored and got lost. They know this. And to maintain their global dominance, just how they maintain dominance domestically, they go where the resources are at. They go where the labor is at, right? The Congo, just had at the, in the UN, there was a lawsuit for Google, Microsoft, Apple, Tesla, because they were using child slavery, these companies. Now, I always bring this up because I think it's the greatest contradiction, right? They're locking me up, my cousins up for selling drugs. They're locking all these people up for, innocuous things that we do domestically for decades of our lives. You have CEOs and major corporations that are going to get a slap on the wrist and pay fines, but no one gets locked up at Google. No one gets locked up at Tesla. No one gets locked up at Apple or the numerous pharmaceutical companies that exploit the resources and the labor of children, right? Now, if it was happening to, children here, there'd be a major outcry. But because it's African children, this is something that is, either neglected deliberately by the media, but also even by other, I would say, like left forces at times. So that context, AFRICOM is a military project where they have, point-to-point interactions with the military in different militaries in Africa. Mind you, a lot of these places happen to be in a neo-colonial situation, which just means that outside forces are really dictating what happened internally, though you may have leaders who look like you. In the same way we have black misleadership here in the United States. Obama was not looking out for my interests, though he maybe looked like me. Maybe he had a decent jumper, but the brother was not having my interests or anybody who looks like me interest, right? So that same situation happens. The United States is pushing to expand like drone strikes in Kenya currently, right? Trying to do that. And, I know you're signed up for the BAP AFRICOM Bulletin. That's really important because these things take place daily, developments in Africa, so much so that sometimes I can't keep up with what everything is going on because it's a daily expansive project that there's so many detailed and moving parts to it. But they do military to military contacts. And one of their main things is saying they're trying to thwart terrorism. One of the key studies, and I can share this with you if you want to share this with your viewers, that was done by an independent outside organization, 2 of them actually, showed that terrorism had risen by, I think, exponentially, almost 200% since the inception of AFRICOM. So I'll be charitable. Let's say AFRICOM wasn't there to exploit the resources and maintain that dominance as an international police, just like police maintain and suppress social dissent here. That's what AFRICOM's doing, if you want to use that analogy. Let's say that wasn't the goal. Well, it's not achieving its goal of thwarting terrorism. You're actually increasing it just by your presence because you haven't decreased it yet. So just on that grounds alone, it's ineffective policy. Get out of Africa. But we do know that is not the case. We know that is a pretense to create. In the same way, they divest from our communities. They deliberately do this. They create crime. They put crack in our neighborhoods and things like that to facilitate crime, to, do the pretense to have the mass policing, the over policing. In the same way, they've created the conditions in Africa to have different internal intracommunal wars and violence that they have precipitated, and then to come in and say, we have the solution to what we started with our military. Let us train you. It's absolutely ridiculous. And anybody who would actually see the context of everything, and it is very complicated, I will say that, but anybody who could just understand the basics of what I just explained would see and say that, oh, well, no, that's nonsense. Furthermore, and I hate to use this as an argument because I think we should really look at the moral and the solidarity aspect of it, but your tax dollars go to this. So your tax dollars, that reasons why you don't have healthcare, the reasons why you don't have housing, the reasons why you don't have education is because of the imperialist project, right? And then they're incapable of taking care of their people, right? Even if this was to be a social, a democratic society, and I'm not asking for that, but even if it were to be that, could it still be an imperialist project? Like, you can't even get that. So that alone should anger you to say, I'm not getting anything out of this deal, right? Like, if you're not moved by the solidarity, or you're not moved by the moral components of this, be moved by the fact that you're getting the worst deal ever. At least the other exploiters in the Nordic countries get healthcare. You don't even get that. So why aren't we moving in an international movement, right? Mind you, I don't like that argument. I think you just be moved by the solidarity, brother. Support these folks. But if you're not moved by that, at least be pissed off, through my language, that you're being exploited, and then they're laughing at you, right? You know, they're eating ice cream and doing videos and wearing dashikis at the White House, you know, passing massive legislation with George Floyd's name that just increases funding to police. Like, come on, right? It's like this should anger people in a serious way, right? And I know I'm angered by it. That's why I'm talking like this. Reset to the conversation. I digress. AFRICOM as a political project, really its purpose is to control the free flow of resources out of Africa. It is to maintain that dominance because, right, if you have a population that's being exploited, there is the possibility, if not the probability, of dissent. The military acts as that protector of capital and private industry, just as it acts here, just on an international level. That's the basic way I can explain it. So that's AFRICOM. I think there's more details that I can express, but I think that gives people like what I would say like a one-on-one course on AFRICOM and its dealings and its operations, because there is there's other comms too. There's Southcom and things like that, right? That are obligated, that there are on the borders and of other places that we have, we've been directly aggressive to. So AFRICOM is one of our main focuses, but we do talk about Southcom and things like that, because they're all operating in the same way, geo-strategically, to maintain and uphold the United States and their project of violence.
Yeah. Just comment on one thing you mentioned about like being angry about how our government allocates money and so on and so forth. You're absolutely correct. We are ranked as, I don't know the exact number, but it's like top 5, I think, countries in the world that does the least amount for its citizens. It's like, seriously, like most of our money goes towards the military, first of all, and then, a couple other things here and there. I mean, they give us some shoddy infrastructure, but how could you possibly deny your citizens healthcare? That is absolutely beyond me, that there's even an argument about it. What do you mean you're not gonna get healthcare to all your citizens equally? That's stupid. That's awful. That might very well be the center of like evil, is to deny people healthcare. That's unbelievable. Anyway, Kobe, did you want to comment on that or add to that? Or
yeah, I mean, I think Nick gave a great explanation of what AFRICOM is, and to the point about healthcare, healthcare, housing, food, our education system is crumbling. I'm a teacher, and it's very, very frustrating, because everybody in that profession, or not everybody, of course, but the average teacher, is trying to do their best and trying to help their students as much as possible. And the same is true of nurses, of social workers, people in all kinds of professions. But if the institutional support is not there, then you kind of see the outcomes starting to get worse, which is what we've seen with education. 50 schools in, I think, 2013 alone were closed in Chicago.
how many?
Of course, 50.
Holy cow.
And I think it was about over the course of, I think, 20 years. And please, look this up for yourself. Don't quote me. I might be a little bit fuzzy on the numbers.
Okay.
But there's been many schools closed, predominantly, pretty much exclusively in Black neighborhoods in Chicago. And so when you see that, when you see schools closing, when you see hospitals closing, and then the police budget keeps going up, that should piss you off. But something that one of the kind of genius tricks of propaganda that America pulls is American exceptionalism, where people think, well, I have no health care, I didn't want that asshole to be president, I wanted someone else, but I only had 2 really bad choices, so it is what it is, or they just don't vote. There's all these things that are so blatantly terrible about the United States, but people at the end of the day will still be like, well, at least I don't live in one of those authoritarian countries. What a shame that would be. Imagine if we were like China. Meanwhile, China actually had a decent COVID response. They actually saved lives.
They got rid of poverty.
right? They're actually building infrastructure, whereas here it's just falling apart while, trillions of dollars are going into war, trillions of dollars are going into the pockets of people who are already billionaires. So AFRICOM is a huge part of that. It prevents, U.S. imperialism in general prevents other countries from developing their own economies in the way that they want to, so that instead of having a fully formed economy, a fully formed infrastructure like every country wants to have, these countries will have a mine, a road going from the mine to the port, and a port, and that's it. It's just taking resources out of the country as efficiently as possible, and maybe like a nice little city, a nice, some nice resorts for the white people to hang out in. These countries are resisting and trying to build better for themselves, and it's something that I think people who call themselves progressives in the United States need to understand, which is that our number one enemy, our first, second, and third priority is fighting against the United States imperialists. We don't have any place to be telling other countries how to run their countries, because those people in China, for example, people in Africa, people in Venezuela, Cuba, these countries, they're perfectly capable of thinking for themselves. They can organize for themselves. They can decide on what their government should look like. They can struggle with anyone who is preventing them from building their own society. So what we need to do is fight against our own government. Last thing I'll say, I was in Syria last year, actually. They had an election there. Syria is one of the quote unquote authoritarian states. It was attacked pretty viciously in a proxy war by the United States, and it gets bombed like once a week by Israel, which is still occupying part of Syria. So the United States, Turkey, and Israel are still occupying parts of Syria. There's still devastating economic sanctions. So in addition to the military warfare, there's also economic warfare, in the sense that if the United States says nobody's trading with this country, like they've done to Cuba, like they've done to many countries around the world, that people starve because of that. People can't get their medication because of that. The price of food goes up drastically. And of course, it doesn't have the desired effect or the allegedly desired effect of promoting democracy and freedom in those countries. So when I was in Syria, one of the people I spoke to asked me, so at first he didn't want to speak to me, because he was like, "Oh, you're an American? Like you're gonna go home and tell lies about us? Like don't even talk to me." But it was actually a celebration when we were talking. So he kind of loosened up after a while. And one of the things he said, which has stuck with me, and I think is going to stick with me for a while, is he asked, are you going to go back and tell Joe Biden to lift the sanctions? And I was like, well, I'll try, but America doesn't really have a democracy like y'all do. And what he said was, that's the people's fault. The people need to fight. Like don't tell us like, oh, y'all, like this is difficult. Like, Joe Biden's not going to listen to you. Like if there's a problem, which U.S. imperialism is a huge problem, like Nick said, not just morally, not just in terms of what is right and just in the world, but strategically, materially, it hurts people who live in the U.S. So we have a responsibility, first of all, to forget all that American exceptionalism and actually start fighting for a better society for ourselves and for our people. And secondly, but together, to do both of these things together, to fight against United States imperialism so that the US gets out of all these countries and they can develop for themselves, because that's a part of what is keeping us oppressed here.
Well, that's okay. That's really interesting. You don't hear about Syria on the news anymore. You haven't for a while. And I wondered about that somewhat recently. I'm like, wow, what's going on in Syria? Because nobody talked. It was on the news all the time before because of what was the civil war, the revolution, Russia, China, us, this, that, the other thing, rebels, so on. I haven't heard a snippet about Syria in months, if not over a year. That's very interesting. I believe it was Harvard, maybe it was Yale, speaking to the America not being a true democracy or even a democratic republic in any sense. But anyway, some academics got a hold of a lot of data, analyzed it, and it showed that the rate at which people, the population of people want X to be the case, and the amount of times our legislators vote in favor of X, meaning align their voting with the general population, the majority, is very, very, very low. It's like below 20% or something.
I think I read that study too, and actually, we do have a democracy for capitalists. So the second
Right.
side of that
No,
study
well,
looked.
exactly.
The second side of the study looked at when multinational corporations want something, it was incredibly high, and that
Right.
it actually met the definition of democracy. So I'll just go back to what Kwame Nkrumah said, and it seems super simplistic, but brother was just like this in Class Struggle for Africa. He was like, if you got a capitalist mode of production, then the government is going to serve capitalist interests. You got socialist mode of production, well, the government goes serve socialist people's interests. And it's super basic. And he goes on to expand upon why that operates. But that's really what it is. We have a capitalist mode of production. So the government, we do have a democracy to a capitalist, not for the people. There's no people's democracy, right? But they can, control and dictate, determine, and decide the politics, the economy, and the cultural. That's really important too, and that's why the media is important. The culture of society and that direction, right? So, not to cut you off, but like I remember I read that study too, and I was looking at it for a paper I was writing. I was like, this is like I always knew we didn't have democracy, but it's great to have quantitative data to throw at other
Yes, it
people
is.
who would
Yeah.
be contrarian against that. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely correct. You're right. I mean, the other part of the study said just what you said. I mean, is that it's all done in corporate interests or private ownership, interests or private ownership. People have to understand that there are many false narratives going on in this country. One of them is what counts as capitalism. Marx is probably has the best critique of capitalism of anybody. Whether you agree with his solutions to it or not is another issue. I mean, I don't consider myself to be a Marxist, but I definitely am anti-capitalist. The capitalism, just the very concept of it, excuse me, means the private ownership of capital. That's where it gets its name from. Socialism means done by everybody or as many as possible. It's done socially. And not to oversimplify these concepts, obviously they're extremely nuanced and very complicated in application. But nowadays people think that capitalism merely means free market. And free market, first of all, isn't even that desirable because there's no such thing as anybody at any time being able to do literally whatever you want with anything. Okay, again, this is where morality comes in. You can't just do whatever. You have to do certain things that are good to do and avoid things that are bad to do, like everybody else on the planet. But I just wanted to clarify that concept that the capitalism does not mean free market. It means the private ownership of capital. And therefore, with inherent in the definition is the exploitation of labor.
I would also add that the free market is a myth and that it is not a
Also,
possibility.
yeah. Right.
One, there are regulations, there always will be, but furthermore, there's price fixing, there's wage fixing, and there's numerous tactics and techniques that undermine the free market by these capitalists who champion the free market, right? Central planning as a concept and idea is done internally for businesses. That's how they get their inputs and outputs. They do this. So central planning works. They do it all the time, but want you to participate in the so-called free market. But as soon as their profits are down, who do they call in to assist them? The government. So it's always interesting to me that the free market is heralded as like this, a champion as this embodiment of freedom, and that if we don't have it as this institution, that society will crumble around us. And it's just so silly because it's not real. It's not a real concept. It's never been practiced. There's no fully free market, and even when it's deeply regulated, it's done on not on the basis of distributing resources in a way that is equitable, distributing resources where they need to be, meeting needs. It's by the highest bidder, right? Like the concept I always like, Richard Wolff, and I've critiques of him, but I think he's incredible. One thing he always says is like, if we have limited milk, With capitalism, free market is going to say, well, the person who buys it wants to give it to the cat gets the milk. And a society that I want to arrange would say, well, no, I think children should probably have that limited amount of milk, and we'll figure out the rest later. But capitalism is not really interested in that. It operates off the rationale of what? Profit, rooted in extreme profit, to the point where like finite resources on a planet where it needs perpetual profit, which is it's not even possible. So not only is it ineffective, it's inefficient, it's illogical. So yeah, the free market it's a sham in many ways. I think Kobe wants to say something, so my bad.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I agree with everything that Nick said. What I was going to say, I think there's a Marx quote. Speaking of critiques of capitalism, I don't know the quote, the exact wording off the top of my head, but essentially what he said is that a free market means that the capitalists are free to do whatever they want.
Right.
To the workers. The capitalists are free to enslave you. They're free to exploit you. They're free to steal resources, to their heart's content. And even someone who was not a Marxist, was not a socialist, I don't even think was really anti-capitalist. Smedley Butler, in War is a Racket, which he wrote in like the 1930s, I think, identified that he was actually a former general of the United States military, and he participated in the conquest of Cuba, the Philippines, Haiti, so many different countries. And what he said was, I was making the world safe for corporations. I was making the world free for corporations, so that they could, grab as much money as they wanted to, as well as, wartime is hugely profitable for these corporations. Their profits skyrocket because the whole mood of the country becomes different, and class struggle kind of slows down, and national struggle picks up to the point where instead of talking about how much my boss is screwing me over, people's wages are still the same, but they're talking about how terrible it is that Russia is doing whatever it's doing, China's doing whatever it's doing. And one more thing I wanted to say was I am a Marxist. I'm a Marxist-Leninist. So for me, as good as Marx's critique of capitalism was, it's not just the critique of capitalism, but it's the kind of explanation of how one society or how one form of society changes into another, that I think is the most important thing that Marx described, which was, the transition from feudalism to capitalism, the transition from capitalism to socialism, which, since Marx was writing about all of this in the 1800s, in the 20th century, people actually saw and started experimenting with how this can be applied. So, like a country like Russia at the time, in 1917, was mostly feudal in the sense that it didn't have much industry. It didn't have that big of a capitalist base. Most of the country was peasant farmers, but they managed to still build. They didn't have to go through decades and decades and decades of capitalism. Same with China, same with Vietnam. Well, they were actually able to, fight against the empires that were oppressing them, and then push forward and build a socialist economy. So there's historically a lot you can learn from these countries who, whether of course not everything that they did was perfect. No country, no individual, no place or person or whatever is ever going to be perfect. But there were some huge improvements in the day-to-day lives of people. For example, Cuba went from being basically a slave state, from being a sugar colony of the United States, where there was widespread illiteracy, widespread poverty, no health care for anybody to a country with better better health care, better statistics on housing, and social equality than the United States, which has I'm not exactly sure how many times bigger the U.S.'s GDP per capita is than Cuba's, but Cuba has a fraction of the money that the United States has, and it's been under a blockade by the United States for the past like 70 years. And with all of that, it's still managed to make huge improvements in the lives of people. And I say all of that just to say, socialism is a very scary word. Communism is a very scary word because of all the propaganda and indoctrination that we've been through in the United States. But it has been there have been movements towards better lives for people in other countries that once you get beyond the propaganda and start looking at how to actually struggle for a better world, there's a lot to learn from these other countries.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. That flew by. It's literally been an hour. That's crazy. We have so much more to talk about. So I just want to say I would love for both of you to come back on the show, and maybe we can focus it more on talking about like different systems like Marxism versus other types. There's a bajillion different types of socialist systems out there. Anarchists and Marxists have a long history of fighting each other, that kind of thing. So we can, that would be a really great conversation. So Nick, I'm going to let you have like the last word if you want to say anything real quick.
Sure, yeah. I'd just be remiss if I talked about AFRICOM, but I don't actually know if I told you all about October is our international action on AFRICOM, really highlighting that work. If you want to get involved with it, sign up for the Black Alliance for Peace and get our newsletters. You can contact me directly. I tell folks all the time, I can get you LinkedIn. And, if you want to start doing that work, start educating people and folks around you, want to organize around it. We have like different, fact sheets and toolkits to actually help you do that confidently. And we're going to be having different webinars and different actions all over the month of October to raise that issue. My thing is this, and this is me speaking as Nick, being on the left and then to be also Black in the United States is sometimes very defeating, because honestly, there is no way to, and I think Kobe knocked it on the head, strategically, you should be anti-imperialist. Everything is going to come secondly, because if we cannot defeat the United States empire and ensure other folks can develop naturally as they would want to, we're not going to be able to do it. It's not a possibility. So trying to work towards socialism, and this is for the social democrats, the democratic socialists, and the other, even anarchists, like it's not going to work. Your first enemy is imperialism. And if you're not defeating that, then no other socialist project is going to take fruition in the United States. I'm sorry. But so that solidarity should just be there, that on a moral component. But if it's not, just know strategically, it's an implausibility for, free one for y'all, right? So I do want to mention that and just end on that. And one last thing, I remember Kobe, it made me think of it. I read a lot of Michael Perinetti. Brother said, I judge a revolution by what it does for the babies, right? If babies are eaten who wasn't previously eaten, that's how I judge a revolution. And that's how I look at things too. The United States does the propaganda, the American exceptionalism is deliberately so that it can undermine other projects, so you don't get any ideas about maybe we should be socialists. Huey P. Newton said, man, you working, you should be a communist. Communism is the only working class ideology, brother. So there's nothing else out there for us. So don't be so scared of the word. Don't let people scare you into being reactionary. Just do your own research, reach out, be in community. So thank you for having us on. I really appreciate you, Kobe, for coming on, talking about the impressive and powerful work that y'all do. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you both very much for coming on, gentlemen. A great pleasure. Nick, always a pleasure. Kobe, good to meet you. Definitely want you on again. This is fascinating stuff and stuff that people really need to hear. That's what this show is for. This show is giving you the news you need, not the news you want. Okay, so this is good
stuff. Can I just plug one thing real quick?
Absolutely.
CAARPR.org, CARPR.org. That is the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. You can see all our information on there. I also want to tell everybody to read this book by my comrade Frank Chapman, Marxist-Leninist Perspectives on Black Liberation and Socialism. I think it's a really important book, and it explains a lot of what we've been talking about on the show.
Can tell what is it called so I can look it up?
It's Marxist-Leninist Perspectives on Black Liberation and Socialism by Frank Chapman.
It's an amazing book.
Frank, just tell me his last name real quick.
Chapman.
Chapman.
Marxist, I got it. Okay, perfect. Yeah, fantastic. Good. Okay, good. I will definitely give that a read for sure. So, okay, good stuff. Thank you again, guys. Everybody, thank you for joining the Illinois Green Party series. I'm your host, David Rich. Till next time, be good, be green.
All power to the people.
All power to the people, baby.